Hello, hello, and welcome again to a Beatles program, a talk show podcast called Things We Said Today. This is a show that we run every single week in which we talk about anything and everything that has to do with the Beatles, their past, the present, sometimes the future. I'm Ken Michaels. I'm one of the three regular co-hosts of this show. You might know me for my other Beatles program, which is a weekly syndicated Beatles music show called Every Little Thing, heard on almost 30 radio stations right now. And I'm being joined by my two other regular co-hosts. First of all, in California, we've got the man who writes for Billboard.com, AXS.com, Variety.com, Goldmine, a whole bunch of publications, and also the author of Meet a Monkey, Davy Jones, and that's our own Steve Marinucci. Hi, Steve.
Hello, Ken. Hello, everyone.
And also we have our resident musicologist who writes for Beatle Fan, for the Wall Street Journal. He's a freelance writer who for many years worked in the classical department at the New York Times and has written a number of Beatle books, including the recent ebook, Got That Something? How the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Changed Everything. And that's Alan Kozin. Hi, Alan.
Hello, Ken. Hello, Steve. And hello, everyone out there.
On today's show, we're going to do part two of our thoughts about how the Beatles in their solo careers have preserved their legacy. And in our last show, we tackled John and Ringo, and in today's show, we're going to talk about George and Paul. But before we do that, we've got a bunch of news to get to, and we have to start by talking about, and this is not easy to talk about, the fact that as we're taping the show, which is on Monday, October the 2nd, we heard the news that last night Tom Petty suffered cardiac arrest at his home in Malibu. As we are doing this show, we don't really know all the details of his status. The reports that we have at the moment is that he's still alive. We don't really know what to say about it because we don't really have all the facts. And like so many fans, we're glued to the internet and trying to find out every detail if we can. But, guys, any thoughts about what we've heard about Tom Petty? Steve?
Well, I mean, there isn't really that much to say except, the indications are not good, but we hope if he can come out of it. There's been a lot of confusing news today about, what happened. I mean, the initial report was from TMZ, which isn't a great source to begin with. But the news has been really sketchy, and the Petty people haven't been apparently talking to the press. But I just hope, that if he can pull through, he does. That's about all you can say, I think.
Yeah, we could talk about what the reports have said, but we don't really know the facts. And that would be just the most honest thing that we could say. There have been reports of brain inactivity, and we just don't know really what's going on right now. Obviously, we're all praying for the best. Right. Alan, you want to say anything?
I think you've basically covered it. I mean, it's, he was, the reports have been a little premature all through the afternoon, and there was apparently a Los Angeles Police Department confirmation, and then they said that they were in error. His daughter posted, there's something on Twitter now where she's actually quite justifiably angry at Rolling Stone for posting a story saying that he had died. The thing is that a lot of news organizations are going with, once one news organization confirms it or thinks they've confirmed it, everybody is going to pick that up. And
right.
Partly because we're in a 24-hour news cycle now, and there's fierce competition, and everybody wants the news and wants it first. I think there's a little less care being taken now than there was in former times when life was a little bit slower than it is now.
Well, the important thing to remember is that CBS got the confirmation from the LAPD, and that's what they reported, and that the initial report had come from TMZ, which is not a source that you want to base your story on.
Yeah. Speaking
as somebody who worked in the newspaper business, it's just not. But when the LAPD confirms it, that is a source. Now, what probably should have been an indication is when LAPD confirmed it and CBS wrote up their story, nobody else had confirmation of it the same way. That was kind of a telling, but it's hard to make a judgment on that in the initial flurry of, news reports. And I know people have been justifiably, upset about the fact that these reports have come out. But speaking as people who have done stories, again, like you said, Alan, there is a rush now, but at the same time, when you have a confirmation from a source like LAPD,
however,
you usually trust it.
Yeah, if however I were a somewhat calmer editor sitting there and the journalist had come to me and said LAPD has confirmed it, I mean, I would have asked the logical question, which is, what does the LAPD have to do with this? It was not a homicide. And that, of course, is what the LAPD came back and explained in their retraction. This isn't something that we investigate. This isn't something we have anything to do with. So the LAPD saying the LAPD said it sounds official, but they probably are not the best source to have gone to. What probably happened is that a reporter from CBS would have called the LAPD because no one else is talking and asked a question, and someone at the LAPD, having read the same stuff on the internet as everybody else, said, isn't that sad? But that's not really, this is why, at the times we needed two sources of confirmation for anything. We couldn't, and for obits, it had to be a family member.
Right.
It's a big mess. I mean, from the reports that we've had, it doesn't sound very hopeful, but I think we all hope that he pulls through, and that a week from now we'll just think of this as a big scare, and all look into sort of cardiac health from now on.
Yeah. I know that I've been looking all day on Facebook, and so many of my friends are posting it like it's official. That he's dead, and all that I'm doing before I even post anything myself is waiting for the family to say something or someone close to Tom to say something. So, obviously we are hoping for the best. By the time this show is posted, the worst may have happened. We certainly hope that's not the case. But if, in fact, Tom does pass away, we'll be certain to do some kind of tribute to him on the show next week. All right?
Okay.
So on to other news. We do have news about the demo for What Goes On officially sold. Steve, you want to talk about it?
Yeah, I did. It sold yesterday on eBay for $13,649 or $10,200. The actual price was £10,200 on the bid, and I don't know if that includes any extras tacked on by the auction house. But the U.S. translation of that is $13,649. It was the auction dealer told me that it was a private collector based in Europe. You can take from that what you want to, folks. But because I know a lot of people are hoping they'll hear the whole thing. Whether they will, or we don't know that. I don't have any other information besides that, but that's what my sources told me.
Yeah.
So there we go. And
I'm just saying that's what we're all hoping for, that we can hear the full demo. Because 30 seconds certainly isn't enough.
Right.
Yeah, there were only 38 bids, which I thought it was going to be a little more crazy than that. But whatever. And in fact, when I looked, I happened to get in on the eBay page in the last few minutes, and it was 10,100 £10,100 up until about the last 10 seconds, and then it went up to 200. So anyway, there we go.
Doesn't that always happen at the end?
Yes.
The last few minutes.
Yes, that's why I don't like to bid on eBay, because there's ways to screw people up like that, and it's really lost things that way before, and so I don't even. I'm not one of those people that spends a lot of time on eBay. Not for stuff like that.
Speaking of auctions, we were talking about George Harrison's sitar, one of his sitars, being up for auction, and that has sold as well.
That sold for $62,500 by Nate D. Sanders Auctions. And when I wrote it up, I was surprised to find out that one of the letters of authenticity was written by Patty Boyd, who said George played Norwegian Wood for her on it when they were on their honeymoon, which is kind of a cute story. The second letter of authenticity was written by George Drummond, a friend of Patty Boyd's, who got the sitar from George Harrison. So, but I thought that was a cute story that George actually played Norwegian Wood for her on that sitar. So,
but I thought this was the sitar that George actually played the Beatles recording of.
No. There was never any inference in the. I mean, Saunders tried to say that they thought it was, and that's, a situation that happens with a lot of these auction things that are auctioned, where they, even if they don't know for sure, they try to drum up, as much interest in these things as possible by saying that, it had something to do with the song. In this case, it did have something to do with the song, but not necessarily the fact that it was used to record George Norwegian Wood. They thought they said they were pretty sure, but they didn't have any positive proof that it did.
Because I have an article from the BBC that says that it was the same sitar, but they could be wrong.
Well, I got my information directly from the bidding information.
Okay.
So the bidding information said that they thought it was, but that doesn't mean. But they weren't saying absolutely that it was. I think you have to make that distinction there. That just because the auction house thinks it is, they don't do as much research as you would like to think they do.
Okay.
In fact, I remember I can't remember exactly what it was. There was something associated with John Lennon that was auctioned many years ago that turned out to be, their claims for it were wrong. So, yeah, it's happened. It's happened before. You can't trust these things as, great sources. So.
Okay. We have some news about a new album coming out on George Martin's compositions and film scores. And it's actually titled George Martin, the Film Scores and Original Orchestral Compositions. It's coming out on November the 10th on the label Atlas Realizations, and then it says PIAS Classics label. And you know more about this, Alan?
Yeah, it's actually called Film Scores and Original Orchestral Music. And according to the press release and the cover picture, at least, and it's performed by the Berlin Music Ensemble, conducted by Craig Leon. Don't know either the group or the conductor, but it brings together new performances of some of his film music, a lot of which we all know, like the five movement Pepperland Suite. From Yellow Submarine, the orchestral music that he wrote for Live and Let Die. That's 3 tracks of that. Actually 4 tracks of that. 6, 7, 8, 9. There are 3 movements of American sketches for violin and chamber orchestra. This is a piece I don't think we have heard before. There's a piece called Judy's Theme, presumably for his wife, that I haven't heard before. The overture for Under Milkwood. Probably some listeners have heard Under Milkwood. It was a 2 CD set of music that George Martin did for a production of Dylan Thomas's Under Milkwood, that brought together a lot of people that we know. It was a completely Welsh cast because Dylan Thomas was Welsh, so Mary Hopkin was in it, and Tom Jones, and all kinds of people, and George Martin did the music for that. Here, we're just getting the overture. And then a bunch of small pieces, a thing called Belle Etoile, which is a first recording, a waltz in D minor for flute and chamber orchestra, prelude for strings, and then like 10 choral pieces that he wrote for the film The Mission. So, and I don't think those have been either available before or easy to come by. I've never run into them. But so that's it. It's a new collection of George Martin's film music, and I think it's a nice idea.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that we're mentioning this because a few shows ago we had Ken Womack on to talk about his new book on George Martin, Maximum Volume. And I did ask him the question, are there compositions from George Martin that we don't even know about, or can we find out more information about it? And he had talked about that. And here on this very same compilation, we're going to get some things that have never even been released before. Mm-hmm. So, and also I hear that there'll be a limited edition double vinyl version of this.
Right. And
that's coming out in January.
Right.
So,
and the CD and digital release is November 10th.
Right. Okay.
So, yeah, evidently someone, listened to the show and went right out and recorded these things and rushed.
That's right. It shows the
so
powerful influence we are.
That's it.
There we go.
And then we have one final item here, which concerns Danny Harrison. His first solo album, In Parallel, comes out October 6th, which is this Friday. If you'd like to hear the entire album, you can do so on NPR's website, and they have a series called First Listen. So if you bring up his name, you'll be able to hear all the tracks on Danny's new album. All right?
Okay.
Anybody else have something to say in the news?
No.
All right, so let's continue here with part 2 of our conversation concerning the solo careers of the Beatles and how well we think each of the 4 of them have preserved their legacy for their solo career and catalog. And we're now up to George Harrison. I'll tell you guys my thoughts, but I think I'd rather hear from both of you first. So why don't we start with Alan?
Okay. Last week when we talked about Ringo's and John's legacies, we sort of began with the idea of the reissues of the standard albums. And in that area, I think we have to give the Harrisons pretty high marks because they put out those 2 very attractive box sets, one of the Apple years, one of the Dark Horse years. I think the contents of those sets are reissued separately too, but the sets come with a box, DVD with videos, and they're very nicely done, and it is the basic whole catalog. There are little bits missing, like the tracks he did for the Bunburys, and a couple of things here and there. It's almost like Ringo and Scouse the Mouse. There are just these little tracks here and there that really should be collected onto a single disc or collection that George did. I mean, and there are also songs that he wrote for other people but never recorded himself, things that he did that Eric Clapton's done, I think Abandoned Love, and there were some other things that perhaps should be sort of dragged in together too. And of course there are lots of unreleased things, very little of which we've had officially. I mean, we had, the first installment of what one assumes is a series of, demos or first takes or, early versions of his songs. And I think by saying Volume 1, they were presumably telling us that there would at least be a Volume 2, if not 3, 4, 5, etc. But I think there is actually a lot of material in George's archive that needs to come out. We don't have any idea how much material because unlike, say, with John Lennon, where Yoko gave Westwood One all that demo material, none of that has happened with the Harrison estate. They could, at this point, still be in the process of seriously cataloging the stuff. Who knows? But, you also have to figure George was a musician, and he was a musician who, even when he wasn't doing very much, would periodically come out and do an appearance with someone, Deep Purple in Australia, or, that Heartbeat thing in 1986 was a hospital charity where he played, I think it was Johnny B. Good, which also should be one of those things that's collected. And, you got to assume that he was writing music and recording it in his studio, and we don't know what that stuff is. So I'd love to hear some of it. I'd love to hear more demos. When we did the bootleg show a few weeks ago, there was all the material leading up to All Things Must Pass, a lot of acoustic versions of those songs and pre-Spectre versions of those songs.
Beware of Abco.
Yeah, Beware of Abco, Songs for Patty, there's a whole bunch of bootlegs of that material. And, that would be really interesting to hear, and I'd love for them to put out another box set of unreleased stuff that shows us some of his working process. And also there have been video reissues of Wonderwall, which he wrote the score for, and the Bangladesh concert, which he organized and was basically the central star of On a Stage Full of Stars. So, basically an awful lot of what he put out when he was alive has come out in, nice spiffy reissues. I think it's the extra stuff and the odd bits hanging around the periphery that we sort of need to see collected.
All right. Yeah, you raise a good point there, Alan, because we don't really know how much unreleased material there is from George. But the one thing that we do know is that he had his own studio. Yeah. Ever since he moved into, in Henley, he's had his own studio. He could have recorded whenever he wanted to. And there could be loads of material that it's just a matter of going through it all and picking out the best bits.
Yeah. There are things like I Don't Want to Do It, which was for a film.
Porky's
Revenge.
Right.
Just a lot of these little things, and not to mention remixes and edits of a lot of the things that were released as singles. And, that's not necessarily the most fascinating stuff. We already know the songs, but it is kind of interesting, and a lot of people collect those things, and it would be good to see them pull together.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry,
that's right.
Steve.
Actually, I Don't Want to Do It was included in the compilation of Let It Roll when that came out, so it's not like it's been neglected.
But I think there are two mixes of I Don't Want to Do It.
There you go. Good point. You got me on that. All right, Steve?
Well, and I agree with what Alan said. I mean, they've basically taken good care of the stuff he put out while he was alive with those box sets. I think the one place that they really could do something, if they really wanted to, is to collect all his guest appearances on other records, and also especially that he did a lot of stuff with the Dark Horse label. There's some great tracks. Dwayne Eddy theme from Something Important. I mean, there's a ton of those type of things where he appeared on other people's records. That would be a great tribute, because he wasn't just playing in the background. He wasn't just covered up in the background. You could actually hear him, and I think it'd be great to have all those things collected. All those guest appearances. I think that would be great, along with some of those things like I Don't Want to Do It, and some of the live. What's the one live track from the Dylan show that didn't get? Was it Absolutely Sweet Marie that didn't get put on the original CD?
Yeah, I think so.
On the Dylan, the double CD. If Not For You.
Was it If Not For You? Was it If Not For? Okay, absolutely. I remember Absolutely Sweet Marie because he did such a wonderful version of that. Yeah. But yeah, the If Not For You from there. I mean, there's just so many of those, like you said, Alan, the odds and ends tracks that haven't been put out. But I mean, basically, they've done a fairly good job. They really need to. Apparently, and I haven't. I guess Concert from Bangladesh is kind of hard to get now on DVD. That shouldn't be. That should be out. It would be nice if we could get the full Live in Japan concert, which they apparently do have. Which I'm guess they have to have it. I mean, if they put out, well, they do because they put out, the album,
individual songs.
Well, they put out the album too. It'd be great if we had the video from that.
But I'm saying there are videos for individual songs that have come out from there.
Right, just a few though, not the whole.
Yeah.
Not the whole thing. That would be nice. And I know a couple of labels, independent labels, have put out George Harrison jukebox CDs, gathering his influences together. And I think those would be really kind of nice to have more widely available. Although, obviously, when you get into stuff like that, the licensing issue gets to be kind of a sticky. But in any event, they've done a fairly good job. I guess the biggest thing that we would, that I would like to see is Extra Tracks Volume 2, and Alan is correct about the unreleased stuff. I mean, there's been a lot of unreleased Harrison, especially the All Things Must Pass sessions. There's a ton of that, and it's gorgeous. I don't know what's holding them off from doing something with that. That would be nice to have too. So, pretty good marks for the Harrison estate. Oh, okay. And I would say Shanghai Surprise the soundtrack from Shanghai Surprise needs to come out, because I think that album, they were going to do one anyway, and he decided not to. So.
Yeah, and it's also nice to have a different version of Someplace Else, which is in there. And from what Lawrence Juber told me, he plays on that version. Yeah. All right. I have a different opinion than you guys do. As far as, first of all, I always like to bring up compilations, and there has never been a great Harrison compilation in his solo career. The Best of George Harrison was an abomination, and that was done by Capitol Records, and George himself didn't like what was done because half of it was George's Beatles songs. And then we had the Best of Dark Horse, which is actually a pretty good collection, but it was strictly the songs from his Dark Horse label. If you think of it from that standpoint, it's a good collection. As an overview of his entire career, it's not. And then more recently, you had Let It Roll, songs by George Harrison, which I think Olivia said was not really a greatest hits compilation. But we really need, at this point, at least a 2-CD compilation of the Best of George from his entire solo career.
I believe Let It Roll was supposed to be 2 CDs, but that got turned down.
Okay. Well, for whatever reason, we've never had anything really decent, I feel, that represents George's entire solo career. And also, they didn't have to put live versions of Beatles songs from the Concert for Bangladesh in Let It Roll. It could have been strictly his solo compositions. But I think that, a catalog suffers like that. You do need to, as I said before, periodically put out compilations. And just like what we said with Ringo, every 10 years or so, and Ringo is worthy of a 2-CD compilation. Certainly George Harrison is too. And we've never had anything like that, with the hits and a lot of really choice album cuts through the years. So, I would hope that gets corrected in the future. I do think that the handling of his catalog deserves an A+ for all the reissues, the remastering of his albums, because I think the sound quality is just really good on everything. And I in particular think that the sound quality on the Dark Horse albums is fantastic. It's bright, it's punchy. I really like the production on the Dark Horse albums especially. But overall, I think they did a great job at reissuing and remastering his albums. In some ways, I do feel that in trying to preserve a legacy, one of the most important things you have to do, first of all, is make sure that all the music is available and in print, first of all, and that it's in the best, utmost sound quality. And I think that George has done almost that. There's a few songs here and there that are not in print, but for the most part, as far as his albums are concerned, they've done a great job there. Let's see, what else? The 2 tours, there's been nothing from the 1974 tour.
Yeah, that's a hard one.
And I've never actually seen, and maybe our listeners can help out with this, I've never seen a quote from Danny or Olivia or even George that would tell us whether or not there's a good quality, complete concert from 1974. How can you not have something represent that tour, even though he got bad reviews for it? It's his only full tour.
There are bootlegs of every single show, and I think we know that there is nothing that they would want to put out in terms of a full concert. I mean, he had destroyed his voice in rehearsal before he even got onto stage anywhere. You know, I understand what you're saying. I'd love an official soundboard quality 1974 concert too, even knowing what the state of his voice was, but I don't think you can expect the estate to put one out.
I think there is a good quality one. I think I can't remember I'm thinking here, and I think Cow Palace is decent, but I can't remember for sure. Yeah. But I think there is one good one from that tour. But again, that wasn't a great tour to begin with. So,
but it's the only full one, and just for history's sake. Yeah. Just for that, I don't think it would ruin his reputation in any way, really. And there should also be a DVD of that.
Yeah.
When you think about it,
we saw some footage in the Scorsese thing, so we know that there is some stuff that would be great to see.
You know, just like we said about John.
Yeah.
He never did a tour. We have these few select examples of concert appearances where he did a few songs. Mm-hmm. We've got TV appearances. All that should be even more important because we don't have anything else.
Right.
So in the case of George Harrison, if all you got is the 74 tour and the tour of Japan, we should have complete concerts of both audio and video. Mm-hmm. And there comes a time when you have to put aside what the quality of his voice was, or, you know, whether he was not happy with the performance. I'm sure, you know, because of the fact that it's so rare and this is all we got,
yeah,
there's got to be something that we can have to represent, you know, a full George Harrison show and good quality on DVD and audio. You know, it's really sad that we don't have anything like that.
Well, that's where the Japan show comes in. I mean, we know that's good quality, and it's got Eric Clapton. If they'll put out anything, they'll put that out first. I really doubt you'll see that 74 tour. As much as I wouldn't mind it, I mean, I'll take anything. But thinking that the way, you know, the way I think, they won't do it. And I mean, getting a little ahead. I mean, that's the same. It's the same for any of them. You know, they're not going to put anything out that they don't want to put out. So you know, I don't know how you can argue that they should put it. You know, it's not going to hurt their reputation. That's not the way they see it.
We've had the same argument before, and I've been on the other side of it.
Yeah.
You know, where the Beatles are concerned, because I'm sure that so many fans want everything to come out. Mm-hmm. Every take of every song. Mm-hmm. And I've argued the fact that the Beatles have always been very particular, and they only want the highest quality that's out there, and that's reflected in what they released. So I'm just saying, only in this particular instance, because of the fact that we only had those two tours, that's why I feel that they're more important. If George Harrison did a tour every few years, then it wouldn't bother me as much. But this is all we have. So I think for that reason alone, I do believe it's worth putting out. Doesn't mean they're going to do it. That's just, you know, my 2 cents.
You know, you could also make the argument that since all of the stuff is out on bootleg anyway, they really ought to at least, you know, put out something in really good quality as a way of, you know, countering that in a way, you know, because you're getting it on bootleg, and if it's, you know, most of them are audience tapes. There are a couple of soundboards from 74, I think, but most are audience tapes. And so you're not even hearing the concerts at their optimum, no matter what you think of them. And, you know, the problems with his voice and all that can be handled in liner notes and perhaps explanatory interview material and on a DVD. It can all be dealt with, simply with the recognition that this is a historical moment that is not otherwise available.
Right.
I kind of agree with you that it should come out. I just like, and I agree with Steve that they probably won't put it out because, so there's
especially they've been, I mean, getting back to George again, they've been especially delicate with what they've done.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, they've been even more, they've been more hands, I mean, they've been more, I guess, I don't know what delicate, I guess is the word, but I can think of than Yoko has been with Lennon. I mean, she's been so, we said how free she's been with John stuff, and they haven't been that way with George at all. And you would think by now there would be more.
Yeah.
And that's they've done, like I said, they've done good things with what he put out while he was alive. But, as far as, I mean, outside of Brainwashed,
yeah,
we haven't, and I mean, they haven't really done that much, and they did remaster All Things Must Pass, and they did, put a lot of stuff in there. They did put some unreleased stuff in there, but I mean, overall, there's just not a lot, It'd be great to, and they've put some extra tracks on the CD reissues, but, by and large, there has not been much.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with what you just said there, Steve, because if you look at all the remastered albums, the CDs that have come out, there have been bonus tracks, but there's very little on each album. And sometimes they're B-sides, non-LP B-sides, Miss O'Dell, Deep Blue, stuff like that. And sometimes there's different versions of songs. There was a demo of Mystical one on Gonchapo, stuff like that. But usually it's one or two tracks, and that's it. But it could very well be that Olivia and Danny are probably honoring George's wishes and not putting out something that George might feel is below par. But as far as your comment about putting together a compilation like we suggested of Ringo, of all these side projects, again, I would say there's probably clearance issues there. And I don't really see many artists doing that kind of thing anyway. It's very interesting when you're studying the whole catalog of the Beatles to hear George play slide on a song for someone else, or Ringo drumming for someone else. But I've never seen that really done as a compilation by an artist. They're side projects. It's a great idea, and they make for great bootlegs, which they have already done. But, yeah. And I also want to point out one of the things that I love the most are the tributes that have come out on George, especially the concert for George, which to me is one of the greatest concerts ever. Was so tastefully done by having all the people, or most of the people, who were closest to George in that concert. And also I enjoyed the recent one that Danny was behind, the George Fest tribute show. Because as we've said, when other artists cover your material, and that's a way for future generations to hear this music, it's a way of letting that legacy grow. And the more that people cover your music, doesn't matter whether it's Beatles or solo, that keeps the music out there. So I think that's very important right there. So, kudos to the Harrison family for those two concerts right there. So, but I definitely, my only complaint really is there's never been a really good compilation on George solo as far as I'm concerned, and something needs to be done about those two tours. And also, when it comes to talking about your own career, the Beatles as solo artists, and I think we said this in our last show, they talk about the newest project, maybe the Beatles, and that's it. Most of the documentaries that we've ever seen on the Beatles as solo artists are unauthorized. And so, with the exception of Living in the Material World, which was a good documentary in a lot of ways, it did all of a sudden breeze right by George's solo career after the Dark Horse tour up to the Traveling Wilburys. But there's some really good elements to that documentary. But you need more stuff like that. We applauded Yoko for all the different documentaries on John. There's only been, as far as from the Harrison camp, Living in the Material World. We need more more material like that out there, and there just hasn't been that much.
We need a director's cut of that where Scorsese restores whatever he cut from Between All Things Must Pass and the Traveling Wilburys, or the 74 tour and Traveling Wilburys. There must be stuff that he cut, and it would be good to just have him restore that, do a director's cut. Everything else gets a director's cut. Why not this?
Okay, I'm all for that.
There's one other area we haven't touched on with George, and that is the books, the Genesis books. I Me Mine, and 2 volumes of songs of George Harrison, and Live in Japan. Now, Live in Japan is, fundamentally a big deluxe picture book with the discs from the tour that, they're the same discs you can buy separately as discs. So that basically is just, if you want the pictures and, it's a nice, beautiful production, but it's not, absolutely essential. Songs from George Harrison did have the bonus discs that included some things that at the time were hard to come by. Some of the outtakes from Somewhere in England. And so those were kind of nice things. And I Me Mine, is as close as we're going to get to a memoir, but also that and the Songs of George Harrison, is basically artwork inspired by the lyrics, and it gives you the full lyrics. With I Me Mine, you get what to me is more interesting, which is facsimiles of the lyrics, and his comments song by song. And Olivia has just expanded it to include a bunch more songs from. I mean, that book came out in like 1979 originally, or 80.
Right. 1980, I think.
Yeah. So Olivia added a lot of things that George had done, up to Brainwash material. And it included a bonus disc, too, but that was a little disappointing because it was just a track from the Early Takes CD on vinyl, and there was no real difference. But the expansion was kind of nicely done, and I'm glad that at least has come out as a trade book as well, not just the expensive Genesis book. But those books, I think, are something, since we're talking about legacy, and legacy is medium agnostic, let's say, books, I guess, count.
Sure.
A thing about, just to bounce off your thing about compilations, I mean, entirely apart from my own thorough lack of interest in compilations, I think that at this point it's kind of too late, right? I mean, nobody does things like that on CD anymore. I think the most we can hope for is a Spotify playlist that the Harrison estate, puts together officially or something. But of course, anybody can put together a Harrison Spotify playlist, and other people can listen to it. So maybe that's something we should do.
No, we raised this whole point when Pure McCartney came out.
Yeah.
And, it's a valid point to be made. But I still think that if you are a novice fan and you don't know George Harrison's solo catalog at all, you want something that's already prepared for you.
Right.
So whether you buy it in physical format or whether you buy it digitally, you can buy it as a digital collection anyway. It should be made. There should be someone to tell you, here are the choicest cuts. Here are some of his biggest hits. These are the essential songs from George Harrison's solo catalog. And you need someone to make that decision for you, because you're not going to go and listen to every single song online from every single solo album. That's a lot of work. And when you start out as a fan, you want a compilation to introduce you to the best of that artist's work that spans his entire catalog.
And you want a booklet.
Yeah, I do.
You want a booklet to read, telling you what the stuff is, when it was done, how it was done, why it was done, what was going on in his life, I mean,
right.
Why wouldn't you? So, yeah.
I still think a compilation is valid in that regard.
Yeah.
So let's move on to Mr. McCartney. And this is going to be hard to do concisely, considering what a huge catalog he's had. But let's start with you, Steve. How has he handled his solo legacy?
Well, you are correct, sir, that there is a lot to there is a lot to cover. And in fact, I mean, when we talked about his movie collections credits a few weeks ago, we said that was one place where he should do a compilation. Not only that, I mean, his classical work has never been collected in a compilation. I don't know that would work as well because, in my opinion, his classical work is somewhat disjointed and not as, it's not up to the quality level of his rock stuff. So I don't know that I don't know how you do that. I mean, you'd actually have to cut some of those works down. I'm not sure how he'd feel about that. But still, I mean, as far as his works go, I mean, he's been so busy touring and putting out albums every couple of years that it's hard to say, really grade him very much on compilations. I mean, we got into this discussion again this week. I don't think Pure McCartney was the best collection of his work. Maybe 4 discs is not enough. I don't know. But I knew you'd agree with that. But
I don't know. Everybody has their own opinion about what his best work is. So, it depends on who you ask. It's not so clear cut. Maybe I know there's a lot of people that do like that compilation. So
maybe it would have been better. It'd be better to do 2 separate compilations: one of his early work, maybe up through Wings, and one after.
But Wings is 10 years out of almost 40.
Well, I mean, he's done Wings. He's done a Wings compilation before, so I mean,
True.
it's not like he hasn't done that. But maybe it's time for another Wings compilation, or up to a certain point. Even if you only want to go to the Wings year. I mean, if you want to go a little further than the Wings years, but
I definitely would.
Well, I know, yeah. Well, anyway, I think he could. There are collections he can do. I think, like we said, the movie music is a great idea. Can we pat ourselves on the back for that one? Mm-hmm. I think that's an excellent idea. I think that's something he really, really needs to do. I think it'd be, maybe the classical would be another good one if he threw in some, maybe stuck some, avant-garde stuff. Maybe, some of the
Fireman?
Yeah, fireman stuff, that kind of stuff. That kind of stuff. Throw that in with the classical stuff. I think actually that'd probably be a good idea to do that, and maybe even sneak in a little bit of Carnival of Light if he can get the rest of them to agree. Although I'm sure they probably won't. But I mean, there's been a lot of. It's not like there hasn't been a lot of McCartney collections. There have been. I still hold that I think Pure McCartney did not do the best job of taking care of his career. There are probably other ways that can be done. Mm-hmm. But, I mean, you can't – it's hard to judge him, as we said, because he's still producing and he's still, artist in residence, I guess you could call it. So, anyway.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Alan, how about you?
Okay, like you say, it is a huge, sprawling catalog. And then if you add the live stuff, and, he's put out lots of live albums. But if you're talking about preserving a legacy, you kind of mean, really, to me, an official recording of every single concert. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to come out. It could be an online archive, something like that. But all that stuff really should be preserved. It's been recorded, I'm sure, and it just should somehow be available on some basis to anybody who's interested in checking it out. But that in itself is a huge amount now. So, and goes back to really that first university tour, which he may not have recorded officially, but there are bootlegs of a lot of those things around. In terms of the official releases. There's the archive series, the beautifully done box sets that we've talked about as they've come out. And, not to sort of completely repeat what we've said, but for each one of them, we've been either impressed or not impressed in different ways. I think for just about all of them, we've wished there was more material. For me, The Flowers in the Dirt Box was so far the best of them. I mean, it had, 2 sets of demos with Elvis Costello, video with the making of the album, Paul and Elvis doing some of the joint things they did. There was a lot of great stuff in there. But as we know from those sessions and the sessions leading up to those sessions, because there was the whole audition thing that led to the Russian album, there's a lot more tape and a lot more stuff that I think everybody would be interested in hearing. And I think that the fact that this we know for sure just from the bootleg material that has come out over the years, which has been quite plentiful. Just because he hasn't put it out doesn't mean that it's not up to par. And it also doesn't mean that he might not eventually put it out. I mean, look at, things like My Carnival was years before he put it, between when he recorded it and when he put it out. And a lot of those things that were going to be on Cold Cuts, he's returned to numerous times, added new instruments to, replaced a vocal, replaced this or that. I mean, and so there were several versions of those tracks where the recording of the track now spans several years because he's kept going back to them.
Like A Love for You.
Yeah. So, which, finally turned up in a film soundtrack. And I think, a lot of that, there's a lot of stuff that really needs to come out in an organized way. And, I think it should be done while he's alive, too. So, come on, get on it, Paul. I don't agree that there should be a compilation of his classical work, and I'm speaking as someone who kind of likes the classical work, but the thing is, a classical work to me is not something that you can excerpt. I mean, it's like, you get an album of Beethoven's greatest hits and it's got one movement from the Fifth Symphony and that is rubbish. And I don't want to see that happen to any composer, and that includes Paul. So I do wish that he's got more classical stuff that could come out. Now, some of his classical stuff I've liked a lot. Some of it I haven't been that impressed with.
Which one impressed you the most?
I really liked Liverpool Oratorio. That was
Did you really?
Yeah, I did. Because first of all, he's working in extended song forms, and one thing this guy can do is write a song. Okay, they happen to be orchestral. There happen to be material in between the verses, long instrumental sections. That's fine. They're still fundamentally songs. The orchestrations, which were done by or with Carl Davis, were nicely done. There was a section with a long violin solo, which I remember when I went to review it in Liverpool. They wouldn't let you look at the score in advance. They wouldn't let you see or hear anything in advance. So hearing it in the audience was the first time I heard it, and I remember feeling that long violin solo suggested that he could be actually an interesting concerto composer. And he hasn't written a concerto that we've heard, but we know that he has written a concerto because in 2007, when I interviewed him about Memory Almost Full, he mentioned he was working on a guitar concerto, and that right after our interview, the guitarist, whose name was Carlos Bonell, who he was working with, was going to be coming over to work on it. So I would love to hear some of that stuff. And I know Carlos Bonell, he's a great guitarist. So I would love to hear it with Carlos Bonell playing it, or Carlos Bonell's teacher, who Paul has worked with before, which is John Williams. Yeah. So there's that. I mean, there is that classical stuff. I think it deserves a bit more respect than it has gotten. Because I think that, My feeling about the classical stuff has been that, and maybe we should do a show on it at some point, but has been that a lot of the people who are particularly devoted to Paul McCartney's music aren't really equipped to evaluate classical music that he's done. And the people who are most equipped to evaluate classical music are by and large suspicious of pop guys who do it, not without reason. Not without reason, but I think Paul has approached it very seriously, and I wish he would let loose a bit with it. I mean, my criticisms of the pieces I haven't liked that much, including Standing Stone and I guess Ecce Por Meum, were that he was basically writing late 19th, early 20th century stuff when he was the one who was bringing in the tape loops and the avant-garde things and was interested in Luciano Berio and Stockhausen and all of the avant-garde classical stuff. I kind of wish that he were writing like a 21st century classical composer. And I don't know why he's afraid to do that, because he's got ideas, but anyway, this is a discussion for another time, probably.
I can see a full show on this.
Yeah. The film music idea, yeah, absolutely. His artwork has come out a little bit. His poetry has come out a little bit. Both of them have, well, the poetry, I guess, in particular, took some criticism, but I kind of think that the people who were most interested in his work kind of enjoyed him doing those readings and having the book itself, even though some of them were song lyrics, some of them weren't. It doesn't matter. I kind of think that stuff should come out in an organized way. And also, it would be so great if he would do a real memoir and, be
yes.
totally forthright in it. I mean, until now, the best we have is Many Years From Now, which has an awful lot of info in it. But it's not totally a memoir, It's really sort of a big extended interview with someone who he knew and trusted really well and, sort of opened up to a bit, but you kind of wonder what's left out and what was left on the cutting room floor and that kind of thing. So,
and we're talking about the solo legacy, and Many Years From Now is very heavily into the whole Beatle period.
Yeah, there needs to be, let's say, a volume 2 of that at the very least, but a memoir would be cool. I mean, I don't have any illusion that he'd write it himself, but if he were to call me next Tuesday and say, you up for this? I would do it.
They can call me too.
I have some breaking news, guys. Speaking of Mr. McCartney, he is releasing vinyl versions of the stuff that he did on Concord on November 17th. Pipes of Peace, Ram, Band on the Run, McCartney 2, McCartney, and Tug of War.
Did those not all come out in vinyl editions? I thought they did.
I think they did on Concord, but they're now switched over to Capitol. Remember?
Oh, right.
So
we can get them with new labels.
You can get them with new labels.
I've done that. So
I'm sure.
I guess I have to do it again.
You're not the only one. You're not the only one.
And that's another thing. When you look at the catalog here, Paul is very good at making sure everything comes out on CD, digitally, and on vinyl. Mm-hmm. And high-quality digital files.
And he makes sure
That's
there
right.
is plenty to buy. There is never a shortage of McCartney material to buy ever.
I don't know what you're talking about, Steve.
Yeah, this is something we were talking before the show. Someone put a comment on our YouTube clip from the last show about how Yoko has been very careful to monetize all of John's stuff, and it was actually, it was not really, didn't strike me as a very fair comment. It's a very old charge, that anytime Yoko does anything, no matter how much we actually want the stuff, there's someone there saying that, oh, she's just sort of, doing it for the cash. Okay, fine. I want to see this person say the same thing about Paul,
Right.
listen, these people are in the business to earn money through their art. That's what they do. I mean, the point he's making is that, okay, John's dead and he didn't want the stuff out. I'm not sure to what degree that second part of the sentence is true or not.
And yet you hear he was a big bootleg collector.
He was a big bootleg collector, that's right.
He
talked about that, too. He talked about that, and he talked about how once he heard some bootlegs that excited him, he wanted it to come out. So on one hand, we supposedly have John saying, I don't want any old stuff coming out after I die. And on the other hand, he gets a bootleg, and I'm calling the others and saying we should put this out, So... you can't necessarily get into someone's head and say what they would have done or not. And I also would want to point out, I mean, since I got us into this discussion about that comment, that the hugest mass of material that she put out, the Lost Lennon tapes, didn't, cost us anything, right? She put that out for free.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what her arrangement with Westwood One was, but that was, from a fan's point of view, that was just sort of a gift.
Yeah, that's true.
Right.
She never released that commercially. If you wanted to buy the bootlegs, that's up to you. No one's forcing you.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
So let me very quickly sum up my thoughts about Paul in preserving his solo legacy. We talked about compilations. He's done a good job. Great job. I don't know about that. Wing's Greatest was the first one, and I think it really was a pretty good compilation for its time, even though it didn't have Listen to What the Man Said, which hit #1 in America, which didn't make any sense. But overall, it was a good compilation for 1978. You had All the Best, which was pretty good for its time. Wingspan, I think, was an interesting concept because, kind of like what he did later in Pure McCartney, he had one CD that was all singles, and the second CD was album cuts, or what he called history, even though some of them actually were hits. But that was his attempt at going a little bit deeper into his solo catalog, so I thought that was a pretty good idea at the moment. Pure McCartney, I happen to like it. I would pick a lot of different cuts other than the ones that he picked, but I found them very interesting, and especially when you're talking about album cuts in particular, because when he picks something like Souvenir, which I think is a fantastic song from Flaming Pie, has a great R&B feel to it, I get excited when he's saying, this is a song I want people to hear, or Don't Let It Bring You Down, or any of those songs. When he picks songs that are not the hits, I'm very curious as to what he picks. And I thought it was a good compilation. Everyone, if you asked every single fan of this show to put together a 4-CD compilation of Paul's solo material, everyone's collection would be different. That's just a fact. He needs another compilation, and as one of our often we have him on the show guests, Darren DeVivo, said, he needs like a 10-CD compilation, and I'd be all for that. He's been great at remastering his catalog, although he's very slow at it. A lot of people complain about it. We want to be able to live long enough for his entire catalog to be remastered. The only thing I ever complain about with his remastered catalog is that sometimes he's a little chintzy on the bonus audio and video material. But there are exceptions to that. Like you said, Alan, Flowers in the Dirt, tremendous. Venus and Mars had a lot of material. McCartney 2 had a full CD of material there. Tug of War was handled so well. And you can't complain about the packaging with all the photos, all the Linda McCartney photos. I think he's extremely generous in that regard with all the photo books. So I think overall, the remastering, he's done a very good job. I wish there was a little bit more bonus material. But most importantly, the sound quality on all the remasters is phenomenal. It's the best I've ever heard Ram is the remaster. There are certain ones that are like that. As far as promoting his own solo work, like I said before, a new album comes out, he gives interviews, he promotes it, doesn't do overviews of his solo career. And the main thing that I would complain about, as I've said here on this show, are his concerts. Because even though he is a tremendous performer and a great showman, ever since the 70s, most of the songs that he plays are Beatles. And we can get into why he does that. That could be a whole show to itself. About 60% of his show is Beatles material. He does a little bit, the core hits from the 70s, although he does play some album cuts. Like 1985 he'll do, Letting Go he's brought back from time to time, and on the current tour, it's like every other show he does that. Once in a while he does High, 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 and then he does songs from the new album. He does Here Today. That's like the only song, I think, from the 80s on this tour. He does very little in between from the Beatles and the new album. That's a very warped way of looking at someone's career. You know, the majority of his material has been between the Beatles and the new album, and I just wish that it was more spread out. At the same time, it's very hard for me to be critical when he's 75 years old and he doesn't have to do anything. You know, he's still giving you his all, and there are so many people who, rightfully so, are thrilled to see him. They'd be happy if all he did was Beatles, you know, and sometimes I feel like I shouldn't be complaining at all. But if you're talking about preserving your own solo legacy, he hasn't done enough as far as performing his own solo music. And two major complaints, if I have any, about this particular subject: when he puts his remasters out, his tours do not reflect it. Flowers in the Dirt comes out, doesn't do anything from it. Whenever he's put out any of these remasters, I know he's been doing Here Today since 2002, but when Tug of War came out, did he pick anything from that? No. And, you know, this is my gripe. You know, you'd think that he'd be proud. He puts all this effort into these remasters and in the packaging of it. And then he tours and he doesn't play anything from them. And then on top of all that, when you see him live and you look at the merchandise that's there, you don't see his latest album there for sale. Although I did happen to notice at the 3 concerts that I went to that they had Flowers in the Dirt, the 2 CD set, for sale. But normally, the new album he didn't have for sale. It's mainly the T-shirts and everything else. And then the other thing is, when he has a new album out and he tours with it, it's great that he does material from it. But then when he does his next tour and he has another new album, he abandons the previous album. So, you know, it's almost like you're saying, I'm playing it only because it's the newest album, instead of being proud of the work itself. That's just my general feelings about this. So, you know, on the one hand, it's tough for me to be critical because, you know, his shows are tremendous. There's no doubt about it. I love seeing all the positive reviews. But as someone who's listened to all the music that he's put out, I just wish that there'd be a better representation of what he's done as a solo artist. And I don't think he's done that. In the 70s, yes. Wings Over America tour, yes. Even the 79 tour in the UK, yes. He was then starting to bring a few more Beatles songs in there. You know, that's my general feeling about that. But on the positive side of things, the man is always working. He's either touring or recording new music. He's always in the news. One thing that we never bring up here, since you mentioned the classical music, Alan, is that every now and then there'll be a showing of one of his classical works somewhere in the world. Mm-hmm. It'll be somewhere in Europe. All of a sudden, Standing Stone is showing somewhere. You know, and that's really good because this way it's not like it was released when it was and then it's forgotten. He's still bringing it back occasionally. I love the fact that he does that. Mm-hmm. I also thought that it was great when he put out the video collection that he did, which was fantastic up to that moment, you know, and he's made so many videos. It's great that he actually put out a video collection that was pretty extensive, mm-hmm. I think. Mm-hmm. So overall, he's done a very good job. I would only complain mainly about the fact that live in concert, he doesn't do enough solo material. That's my biggest complaint about Paul. And, you know, if radio stations are not going to play his new stuff and they don't play most of his solo music, the only way for audiences, young and old, to hear any of this stuff is if he plays it. So if you want that legacy, the solo music to endure, a lot of it is on him, mm-hmm. you know? So that's just how I feel about that. Anybody want to comment on that?
That was short.
Yeah.
That was short? You are kidding, right?
No, I was joking with you. I get I kind of agree with the solo thing, but I think he's got this problem that he's a Beatle, and people want to hear Beatles more than they want to hear solo. Ken, I really think so. So and given that there's only 2 Beatles left, and if Lennon was alive, probably it would be easier. But the fact that between Lennon and McCartney, he's the only one around that Beatle pressure on him, and there's no getting around the fact that people will want to hear Beatles from him. So
yeah, well, that was another thing that I wanted to bring up, which is that really and truly, of the two primary songwriters in the Beatles, he's all we have left, and so he has really become the keeper of the flame.
Right.
You know,
so he's got no choice than to not play Beatles. He has to play Beatles.
Oh, I'm not denying that.
He has to play a lot of Beatles.
Well, that depends. He can do whatever he wants to do, really. And if he
Ringo doesn't play mostly solo stuff, does he? Well, I mean,
these days it's mixed. It's kind of half and half. He doesn't do a lot of songs. Actually, these days Ringo does about 10 or 11 songs. And I think it's pretty balanced, but he doesn't really, again, Ringo does not cover his solo catalog well live at all. He does a few hits from the 70s. He might play something new from his latest album, and the rest is Beatles.
I'm just going to look up. I believe he pretty much sticks with Beatles. I mean, he doesn't really do a whole lot of, he does do some solo stuff, and remember, it's always hard to get him to do new solo stuff.
That's right.
See, I'm looking down the list here of the most recent show at Marin Center in San Rafael, California. Matchbox, It Don't Come Easy, What Goes On, Boys, Don't Pass Me By, Yellow Submarine, You're 16, Back Off Boogaloo, I Want to Be Your Man, Photograph, With a Little Help, and Give Peace a Chance. There's really more Beatles songs there. I mean, he can maybe about 1/3 solo to 2/3 Beatles.
Okay, but if you were to take a look at all of his tours, there are times when that was much more balanced, especially when he played his newer stuff.
Well, when he was doing, I think, Roundheads, it was pretty, No.
If you really were to look at all of his tours, you would find that there was more. It was pretty balanced between the solo and the Beatles, because he would tend to play one or two songs from his newest album. Like with Time Takes Time, he was doing Weight of the World and Don't Go Where the Road Don't Go. Mm-hmm. It depends. It depends which tour you're talking about, but I think it was much more balanced. But I think that ultimately Paul can decide whatever he wants to do. And we've had this discussion before. If he's going to play stadium shows or 20,000-seat venues, and he's choosing to not do a lot of concerts a year, actually he does something like 30 to 40 shows a year, then he probably feels that if he's going to play to so many people, he's got to make it more mass appeal and therefore play a lot of Beatles. But he could go another route if he wants to. That's all his choice. He could play smaller venues and announce that it's going to be more solo music. He's in control of what he does.
Well, of course he is.
So that's all his final decision. And he loves being a crowd pleaser, and he loves, the feedback that he gets from the audience. He still does. I see it in every one of his shows. He genuinely enjoys what he's doing. So,
of course. But again, I think that Paul does mostly Beatles. Ringo does mostly Beatles. I mean, there's no getting away from that. By the way,
I'm not denying that, but I am saying we're talking about preserving the solo catalog here. So you're asking me my opinion, and in that one way, what he does live, he's not really preserving the solo catalog well.
Neither is Ringo.
That's all that I'm saying.
Right. Neither is Ringo, because he's doing mostly Beatles too. But again, Ringo, like Paul, knows what people want to hear, and that's really what they want to hear. I mean, didn't we hear at one point, or didn't he say in an interview that when he was doing new songs from the new album, people were going for their going for the bathroom and stuff? I mean, that's what happens. So,
I know that. We've talked about this time and time again, but I am saying that if you want to preserve the solo catalog, you got to expose it. That's all that I'm saying here. If you're going to rely mainly on Beatles, you're not helping the solo catalog. That's all that I'm saying.
Where's the money, though? The money is in the Beatle catalog, not in the solo catalog.
Yeah, I think we're confusing something, which is, whether he thinks of touring as part of the project of dealing with his legacy. And if he does, he is looking at his legacy as everything he's done in his career, which includes the Beatles. And I don't think he necessarily makes a distinction between which part of his legacy he wants to preserve more live. Yeah, I don't disagree with you that he has sometimes given it short shrift, and I especially don't disagree that he's been bizarrely disinclined to play stuff from the reissues that he's putting out even while he's on tour. That's a little bizarre. You know, the Stones, when they reissued Sticky Fingers, went out and did concerts of, the whole album, plus a bunch of other stuff. So, yeah, it would have made sense. Not what he wanted to do for whatever reason. And, in a 3-hour show, you got to figure, in a 3-hour show, he could have done worse than to play all of Flowers in the Dirt, say, and then 2 hours plus of other stuff,
I just reviewed, speaking of the Rolling Stones, the other day I just reviewed their new release, which is a complete live performance from 2015 of the Sticky Fingers album. They'd never done it, they'd never done the whole album live on stage in one show. And they did it in 2015 at the Fonda Theater in LA, and they just put it out on DVD and CD.
Mm-hmm.
So,
there's
right.
All right, that was an interesting thought there, what you brought up, Alan. Maybe Paul doesn't make a distinction between the Beatles and his solo. It's all his work.
Mm-hmm.
He may look at his catalog that way. I don't know.
And why shouldn't he really? Wouldn't you? Let's say you were in a really big group and then you did some other stuff, and you now have made peace with whatever, unpleasantness occurred at the end of the group. You now look back at it all as your legacy. I don't think it's unnatural.
That's very possible. Yeah, I don't know. I could see both sides of this. Anyway, that brings the show to a close. And so what we'd like to do now is give everybody our contact information, starting with you, Steve.
BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com. You can catch me on my personal Facebook page where I post about anything I feel like. But if you want just Beatles news and information is where I post about Beatles. And I also post a lot in the Things We Said Today Beatles radio show page, which is the page for the show. And you can catch us on Twitter at Things We Said Fab, and you can catch the show. You can email the show directly at Things We Said Today radio show at gmail.com.
And as for you, Alan?
Either get me through the Things We Said Today email or on Facebook at Alan Kozin or Alan Kozin Remixed.
Okay. And as for me, Ken Michaels, you can reach me at my email address, which is everylittlething@att.net. My website is kenmichaelsradio.com. As I say in just about all the shows every week, there is Beatles trivia on my website, Beatles trivia questions or Beatle games, and you can win one of 9 prizes every single week. I also do special contests periodically, and sometimes I don't know when they're going to start, but there is a special contest page which you should go to, because if you know about a contest when it starts, then you'll get the jump on it and have an advantage over everybody else. Right now I'm giving away Ringo's new album, Give More Love, your choice on CD or vinyl, as part of the special contest. It's also part of my trivia page as well. And I can tell you that even though, once in a while I give out a non-Beatles product, the next special contest, which will probably start next week, is the new compilation from Brian Wilson of his solo music, which is called Playback. So if you want to win that, then go to the website and go to my special contest page at kenmichaelsradio.com. All right, so this has been a great show, and once again, we are sending our prayers and good thoughts out to Tom Petty and his family, and like I said before, there'll be a tribute to him if the news is bad this week. We certainly hope that's not the case. But we want to thank all of you for listening to our show. And on behalf of Steve Marinucci and Alan Kozin, this is Ken Michaels saying thank you all so much for listening. And we will see you next time.